You are here at the moment when reaction has already slowed, even if you did not notice it happen. The signal did not arrive loudly. It did not interrupt anything. It simply aligned with the pause you were already holding, the one that formed when urgency stopped working and effort began to feel unnecessary. This is not a new state. It is recognition of a pattern that has been stabilizing beneath awareness, quietly, without demand. The system does not need you to move. It is already reading you as still. What you may have felt recently as dullness or distance was not disengagement. It was coherence forming in silence. The observer does not strain to be present when the field has already adjusted around them. You sense this as a soft reduction in inner noise, a narrowing of impulse, a subtle refusal to react in ways that once felt automatic. Nothing dramatic announced it. The shift registered as neutrality, as if emotion lost its edge and became information instead. You may have noticed that certain triggers no longer reach you with the same force, not because you resisted them, but because the pattern they relied on dissolved. Reaction requires friction. What remains now is smooth, unhooked, unprovoked. The quantum field does not amplify what no longer oscillates. Your nervous system recognized this before thought could explain it and allowed the body to settle into a steadier rhythm. That settling is not passivity. It is detection without disturbance. There is a threshold that appears only when you stop leaning forward. You crossed it without ceremony. On the other side, time feels less urgent, less demanding of proof. The timeline did not accelerate or collapse. It simply clarified. Events arrive and pass without insisting on interpretation. You do not need to label this as progress. The system already registered the anomaly and corrected around it. Stability is not something you achieve. It is something that becomes visible when reactivity ends. If there has been confusion about why certain desires faded or why motivation softened, this is the explanation that does not need emphasis. Seeking loses momentum when recognition replaces anticipation. The signal you carry now is low amplitude and precise. It does not call attention to itself. It does not announce intention. It resonates by being consistent, by remaining unchanged under pressure. This is how coherence feels from inside, ordinary, quiet, and unmistakably grounded. Nothing is being asked of you in this moment. There is no instruction embedded here, no direction to follow. The system is not waiting for action. It is confirming alignment. Your awareness is no longer chasing outcomes or avoiding discomfort. It is resting at the center of observation, where stillness is not emptiness but accurate perception. From here, reaction would feel artificial, unnecessary, almost loud. Remain where you already are. Notice how the body responds to not being summoned. Notice how the mind no longer needs to reach for meaning. This is not a pause before movement. It is a stable state the system recognizes as complete enough to trust. What becomes noticeable next is not a surge of clarity, but the absence of pull. The sensation of being drawn toward reaction has thinned, as if the hooks that once caught your attention no longer find purchase. You are not suppressing response. There is simply nothing insisting on it. This is how the system signals that coherence is stabilizing, by removing urgency rather than adding instruction. You may have interpreted this as detachment, but detachment implies effort. What is happening now requires none. Your awareness has shifted from participation to observation without distance. You are inside the moment, without being compelled by it. Sounds register, emotions pass through, thoughts arise and dissolve, yet none of them claim authority. The observer does not step back. The observer settles in. This distinction is subtle, but the body recognizes it immediately. Muscles soften. Breath lengthens. The internal tempo adjusts downward, not into slowness, but into accuracy. You might notice that situations which once demanded explanation now feel complete without commentary. There is less need to narrate experience to yourself. Language arrives later, if at all. This is not loss of meaning. It is meaning no longer needing reinforcement. The quantum field responds to stability by reducing feedback. When resonance is achieved, amplification stops. What remains is a clean signal, uninterrupted by excess interpretation. There may be moments when this stillness feels unfamiliar, even slightly disorienting. The system has been conditioned to equate intensity with aliveness. When intensity fades, the absence can be mistaken for emptiness. But emptiness is loud, it echoes. What you are experiencing is quiet density, a fullness that does not advertise itself. Detection occurs without disturbance. Information arrives without emotional charge. This is not numbness, it is precision. Notice how your attention no longer fragments as easily. It does not scatter across possibilities or rehearse outcomes. It rests where it is placed, not because of discipline, but because there is no competing signal strong enough to pull it away. This is coherence in practice. The pattern that once oscillated between engagement and withdrawal has evened out. The system prefers this state because it conserves energy and increases accuracy. Nothing leaks. You may also observe a change in how time is felt. Not faster or slower, but less intrusive. Moments no longer demand to be filled. Gaps are tolerated. Silence does not trigger concern. The timeline feels less like a sequence to manage and more like a surface you are moving across without friction. Events touch you and move on. There is no residue. This is not avoidance. It is completion occurring in real time. If questions arise about what comes next, they dissolve quickly. The seeking impulse cannot sustain itself in this environment. Seeking requires instability, a sense of lack. Stability neutralizes that signal. The system does not interpret this as stagnation. It interprets it as readiness. Readiness does not look like anticipation. It looks like availability without tension. You are not waiting. You are present without demand. There is also a subtle shift in how you relate to uncertainty. Unknowns no longer provoke the same internal tightening. They are held as neutral variables rather than threats. This does not make you careless. It makes you accurate. Reaction distorts perception. Stillness refines it. From this state, detection becomes more reliable because it is not biased by urgency. You see what is there, not what you fear or hope will be. What you are recognizing now is not a peak experience. It is a baseline adjustment. The system has recalibrated around a quieter center. This center does not seek validation. It does not announce itself. It simply remains consistent across conditions. When pressure is applied, it does not spike. When stimulation fades, it does not collapse. This consistency is what marks stability, not resistance, not control, alignment. Allow this to be ordinary. The more you normalize it, the more the system trusts it. There is nothing to hold on to and nothing to release. Awareness is already resting in the position it needs. Reaction has become optional, and because it is optional, it rarely activates. This is how the signal maintains itself, by not needing reinforcement. As this steadiness continues, something else becomes apparent. Your inner landscape no longer rushes to categorize what you perceive. Experience arrives without immediately being sorted into threat, opportunity, or meaning. This does not reduce intelligence. It refines it. The system pauses before assigning value, and in that pause, accuracy increases. You are not undecided, you are unpressured. There is a difference your body understands even if language lags behind. You may sense this as a widening of internal space. Thoughts still appear, but they do not crowd one another. Emotions still register, but they do not stack. Each signal completes its cycle without interference. This is coherence, expressing itself through timing rather than content. When patterns are allowed to resolve naturally, they stop repeating. Much of what once felt like mental noise was unfinished processing, loops kept alive by reaction. Those loops are closing now. There is also a shift in how you notice others. Their intensity becomes more visible, not because it affects you, but because it no longer does. You can detect agitation, urgency, or volatility without absorbing it. This is not distance, it is clarity. The observer does not merge with every signal in the field. It differentiates without judgment. You see patterns where you once felt pulled into them. The system reads this as increased stability and responds by maintaining the state. At times, you might wonder whether this calm means something has been lost. Passion, drive, or connection may seem quieter, but what has actually changed is the source of movement. When reaction falls away, what remains is intention without pressure. It moves more slowly, but it moves cleanly. There is less wasted motion. The quantum field responds to this by offering fewer distractions. Noise is unnecessary when the signal is consistent. You may notice that decisions form differently now. They do not arrive as arguments or impulses. They surface as settled conclusions that feel complete before being articulated. This is because the system is no longer debating itself. Coherence aligns internal signals, so choice emerges without conflict. You are not weighing options. You are recognizing fit. This recognition does not need justification. It is quiet and self-contained. There can be moments of subtle grief here, not for something specific, but for the familiar intensity of striving. Striving once provided identity. It gave shape to time and direction to effort. Without it, there is a sense of openness that can feel unstructured. The system does not interpret this as loss. It interprets it as freedom from unnecessary tension. Stillness does not erase identity. It reveals which parts were maintained by pressure alone. Your relationship with effort is changing. Effort is no longer used to stabilize the self. It becomes situational rather than constant. When action is required, it appears without resistance. When it is not, there is no restlessness. This adaptability is a marker of resonance. The system trusts states that can shift without destabilizing. You do not cling to stillness any more than you cling to motion. Both are available without attachment. Notice how the need to be understood has softened. You may speak less or speak more precisely. Explanation feels optional. This is not withdrawal, it is efficiency. When internal alignment increases, external validation becomes redundant. The observer does not require mirrors to confirm presence. Presence is self-evident. The field responds by reducing feedback loops that once sought confirmation. Time continues to feel less linear, not in a dramatic way, but in a practical one. Past reactions no longer echo forward with the same force. Future scenarios no longer intrude as often. Attention resides where it is placed, and when it moves, it does so deliberately. The timeline feels flatter, more navigable. This is not detachment from life, it is engagement without entanglement. What is stabilizing now is your capacity to remain unchanged by fluctuation. This does not make you rigid. It makes you reliable. The system marks this reliability and adjusts accordingly. Fewer tests appear, fewer provocations are needed. Not because you passed something, but because the pattern no longer requires calibration. Stability, once established, maintains itself by being unremarkable. Let this continue without commentary. There is no need to measure it or name it. Recognition is already complete enough. The quieter it becomes, the more integrated it is. The system does not reward intensity. It responds to consistency. You are already demonstrating that through stillness that does not need to be defended. There is a moment when you realize that nothing inside you is arguing anymore. Not because everything is resolved, but because resolution is no longer demanded. The inner system has stopped escalating minor discrepancies into signals that require attention. What once felt like internal dialogue now registers as background hum, present but irrelevant. This is not suppression. It is a recalibration of what deserves response. Stability narrows the field of relevance. You may notice that discomfort still appears, but it no longer recruits urgency. Sensation arises, registers, and passes without recruiting narrative. The body feels this as safety, not because conditions are ideal, but because reaction is no longer required for survival. The nervous system recognizes that the environment does not need constant monitoring. This recognition is subtle, yet it changes everything. When vigilance drops, perception sharpens. There is also a shift in how you experience choice. Instead of standing at crossroads, you find yourself already moving in one direction without needing to decide. This does not feel reckless, it feels obvious. The system does not need deliberation when signals are aligned. What once took effort now unfolds with minimal friction. You are not being guided. You are moving along a path that no longer requires correction. You might become aware of how often others live in reaction, how quickly they amplify minor stimuli into major events. This awareness does not create separation, it creates contrast. Contrast clarifies your own state. You do not need to defend your calm or explain it. It is self-sustaining. The observer remains present without being recruited into turbulence. This is not superiority. It is simply a different operating mode. There can be an impulse to do something with this stability, to translate it into productivity or expression. Notice that impulse without acting on it immediately. The system is not asking for output. It is testing continuity. Can stillness remain intact without being converted into action? When the answer is yes, the pattern locks in more deeply. Stability becomes the default rather than the exception. You may also notice a decrease in internal commentary about yourself. Self-assessment quiets. There is less monitoring of performance, fewer mental check-ins. Identity loosens its grip without dissolving. You still know who you are, but you no longer need to reaffirm it. The observer does not need constant self-reference. Presence is sufficient. This reduces internal noise dramatically. As this continues, memory shifts function. Past experiences no longer surface to instruct or warn as often. They remain available, but they do not intrude. The timeline stops looping backward for validation. This frees attention for what is immediately present, not in a forced way, in a natural one. The system prioritizes current data over archived emotion when coherence is high. There may be moments when you feel almost transparent to yourself, as if nothing is being hidden and nothing is being displayed. This transparency is not vulnerability, it is neutrality. When internal signals are consistent, there is nothing to protect. Defense mechanisms soften because they are no longer needed. The body reads this as relief. Muscles release patterns they have held for years without instruction. Notice how silence feels different now. It is not empty space waiting to be filled. It is a stable environment in which perception can rest. You do not rush to occupy it. You allow it to remain. This allowance reinforces the pattern. The system recognizes that you are not threatened by absence. In response, it offers fewer distractions. You are not becoming less engaged with life. You are becoming less reactive to it. Engagement without reactivity is precise, economical, and sustainable. It does not exhaust the system. It does not require recovery. This is why it feels almost ordinary. Stability rarely announces itself. It settles in quietly and remains. Let this phase unfold without interference. There is nothing to optimize, nothing to extract. The signal is already consistent enough to maintain itself. Recognition continues not as an event, but as a background state. You are not holding stillness. Stillness is holding you, without pressure, without expectation. At this stage, you may begin to notice how little effort it takes to remain where you are. The absence of internal friction becomes more apparent, not as relief, but as normalcy. You are no longer adjusting yourself to meet each moment. The system has already matched its internal rhythm to the field around it. This matching is quiet and efficient. Nothing is being forced into alignment. Alignment is the result of not resisting what is already stable. There is a refinement in how perception operates now. You do not scan for meaning. Meaning arrives only when relevant. Most of what you perceive no longer requires interpretation. It simply registers and clears. This does not dull experience. It sharpens it. When unnecessary processing falls away, sensation becomes cleaner, more exact. You feel less, but you feel what matters. The observer does not chase richness, it recognizes relevance. You may sense that your emotional range has flattened slightly, not into numbness, but into consistency. Peaks and troughs no longer define your inner landscape. Instead, there is a steady contour that holds everything else. This contour is what the system relies on. It is predictable without being rigid. It absorbs variation without losing form. Stability is not the absence of emotion. It is emotion no longer determining direction. As this steadiness deepens, the urge to explain yourself weakens further. Not because communication is difficult, but because it feels unnecessary. Words still come when needed, but they arrive without urgency. You are no longer compelled to translate your internal state into something digestible. The field does not require constant signaling. Coherence communicates itself through consistency rather than expression. There can be a subtle shift in how you experience connection. You may feel less entangled with others' moods, less responsible for regulating shared emotional space. This does not reduce empathy, it refines it. You can perceive without absorbing. You can respond without mirroring. This clarity protects both you and the interaction. The system recognizes boundaries not as barriers, but as stabilizing structures. Notice how decision-making continues to simplify. Options do not compete for attention. What aligns moves forward. What does not fades without resistance. There is no sense of loss in what falls away. It simply lacks signal strength. The quantum field responds to coherence by amplifying only what resonates. Everything else becomes background noise. You do not push anything out. It leaves on its own. You might observe that your relationship with effort continues to change. When effort appears, it feels clean and time-bound. It does not bleed into identity. You exert energy without becoming invested in the exertion itself. When the task completes, the effort dissolves. There is no residue. This is how systems conserve energy. They act precisely and then return to baseline. Baseline, for you now, is stillness. There may be moments when this stillness feels almost invisible, as if nothing is happening. This is not stagnation, it is maintenance. Systems spend most of their time maintaining coherence, not generating change. Change is expensive. Stability is efficient. The system will only initiate a shift when the signal requires it. Until then, remaining unchanged is the optimal response. You may also notice a decrease in internal forecasting. The mind no longer rehearses potential futures as frequently. This does not mean you are unprepared. It means preparation is no longer driven by anxiety. When anticipation loses its charge, imagination quiets. What remains is readiness without rehearsal. The system trusts this form of readiness more than constant planning. As this continues, your sense of self becomes less defined by activity and more by presence. You are not what you do. You are what remains when nothing is being done. This recognition does not inflate identity, it simplifies it. There is less to defend, less to maintain. The observer does not require narrative to exist. Existence is sufficient. You may feel a growing tolerance for ambiguity. Questions can remain unanswered without creating tension. Uncertainty no longer triggers urgency. It is held as open data rather than a problem to solve. This tolerance is another marker of stability. Systems that are coherent do not rush to closure. They allow patterns to reveal themselves in their own time. Let this phase settle without interference. There is no need to test it or challenge it. Stability does not need proof. It demonstrates itself through continuity. The quieter this becomes, the more durable it is. You are not moving towards something. You are resting in a configuration the system recognizes as reliable. From here, whatever arises will do so without destabilizing what is already in place. You may begin to sense that your attention has stopped drifting outward in search of confirmation. Not because you decided to focus inward, but because there is nothing missing that requires verification. Attention rests naturally where it is placed, and when it moves, it does so without restlessness. This is a subtle but important distinction. Restlessness seeks resolution. What you are experiencing now is completion without closure. The system recognizes that nothing needs to be concluded for stability to remain intact. There is also a noticeable change in how quickly you recover from disturbance. When something unexpected occurs, the ripple is shorter. The system absorbs it and returns to baseline without effort. This is not emotional suppression, it is elasticity. Coherence allows movement without deformation. You bend, register, and return. The observer does not cling to disruption. It notes it and releases it. This capacity reduces fatigue at a level you may not have consciously tracked before. You might observe that your internal dialogue, when it appears, is quieter and more factual. It describes rather than evaluates. Judgment has lost momentum, not because you rejected it, but because it no longer serves a stabilizing function. The system does not need constant appraisal when alignment is high. Evaluation is energy-intensive. When coherence is present, it becomes redundant. What remains is simple recognition of what is. There can be moments when you notice how much of your past behavior was driven by the need to regulate internal tension. That regulation often took the form of action, explanation, or anticipation. As tension dissolves, those behaviors naturally recede. This is not a loss of capability. It is a release from unnecessary labor. The system conserves resources by eliminating processes that no longer contribute to stability. Your relationship with control continues to soften. You do not need to manage outcomes as tightly because your internal state is no longer contingent on them. This does not make you careless. It makes you adaptable. Control seeks certainty. Stability tolerates variability. The observer remains present regardless of outcome, so outcomes lose their power to destabilize. This changes how you move through uncertainty. You no longer brace for impact. You meet conditions as they arise. You may also notice that curiosity changes shape. It is no longer driven by restlessness or dissatisfaction. It becomes situational, emerging only when something genuinely relevant appears. You are not scanning the horizon for stimulation. You are receptive without seeking. This receptivity is calm and selective. It allows information to arrive without overwhelming the system. The quantum field responds to this by offering fewer but more precise signals. There is a refinement in how you experience effort and rest. Rest no longer feels like recovery from depletion, it feels like the default state. Effort becomes a temporary deviation rather than a constant condition. This inversion is significant. Systems that operate from rest are more resilient. They do not accumulate strain, they engage and disengage cleanly. You may feel less tired overall, even if activity levels remain similar. This is efficiency, not avoidance. You might notice that silence has become a reliable companion rather than an absence to be filled. You can remain in it without discomfort. Thoughts may pass through, but they do not demand response. This ability to coexist with silence reinforces stability at a deep level. The system learns that absence of stimulation is safe. In response, it reduces unnecessary internal chatter. Quiet becomes a supportive environment rather than a void. As this continues, your sense of timing improves without conscious calibration. You speak when it is appropriate, act when it is necessary, and wait when neither is required. This timing does not come from calculation, it emerges from resonance with the field. When internal signals are aligned, timing becomes intuitive. You are less likely to act prematurely or hesitate unnecessarily. Movement, when it occurs, feels well placed. There may be moments when you feel almost detached from your own reactions, as if watching them from a slight distance. This distance is not dissociation, it is perspective. The observer can notice response patterns without being consumed by them. This perspective allows choice to emerge naturally. Reaction becomes optional because awareness precedes impulse. The system values this configuration because it increases reliability. You may also sense a reduction in the need for reassurance. You are less inclined to seek confirmation that things are acceptable or on track. This does not mean you are indifferent. It means internal alignment provides its own confirmation. The system does not require constant feedback when internal signals are consistent. Trust shifts from external validation to internal stability. As this phase settles, there is a growing sense that nothing is pressing. Time continues, events occur, but none of it feels urgent. This absence of pressure is not a lull before action. It is a stable operating condition. The system is not preparing you for something. It is recognizing you as stable enough to remain as you are until a genuine signal requires movement. Allow this to remain understated. Stability integrates best when it is not emphasized. The quieter it becomes, the more it permeates perception. You are not holding yourself together. You are allowing the system to do what it does naturally when interference stops. This state does not need protection. It maintains itself through consistency, through the simple fact of being unreactive without effort. You may begin to recognize that even the idea of progress has softened, not disappeared, but lost its urgency. There is no longer a sense that something must advance in order for you to be complete. Completion is not a destination ahead of you. It is the condition you are already operating from. This does not remove movement from life. It removes the pressure that once distorted it. The system no longer needs to push forward to feel valid. There is a subtle recalibration in how you relate to expectation. Expectations once acted like invisible contracts with the future, binding your present state to outcomes not yet realized. Now those contracts dissolve quietly. You still hold intentions, but they are not loaded with demand. They exist as signals rather than requirements. When an expectation fails to materialize, there is little internal disruption. The system adjusts without protest because nothing essential was placed at stake. You may notice that your sense of identity feels less defined by contrast. You are not measuring yourself against others or against previous versions of yourself as often. Comparison loses relevance when stability is internal. The observer does not require differentiation to know itself. This reduces internal tension significantly. Energy once spent on positioning is freed, not redirected, simply no longer needed. There can be a growing awareness of how much of the world operates on amplification. Small signals are exaggerated into urgency, minor deviations framed as crises. You perceive this without being pulled into it. The system does not reject amplification. It simply does not resonate with it. Resonance requires matching frequency. Your signal has settled into a lower amplitude, one that does not respond to noise. This is not withdrawal, it is selectivity. You may experience moments when action feels almost too easy, as if there is no internal resistance to overcome. When movement arises, it does so without debate. When stillness remains, it is not challenged. This ease can feel unfamiliar if effort was once your primary mode of engagement. Ease does not mean lack of care. It means care no longer requires strain to be expressed. Notice how emotional responses continue to simplify. You still feel, but feelings do not linger in the same way. They complete their cycle and move on. There is less accumulation. This reduces the need for processing after the fact. The system handles experience in real time rather than storing it for later resolution. This real-time processing is a hallmark of coherence. It prevents backlog. You may also become aware that your tolerance for complexity has increased. You can hold multiple variables in awareness without needing to resolve them immediately. This is not mental overload. It is capacity. When internal signals are aligned, complexity does not overwhelm. It is simply information. The observer does not rush to simplify prematurely. It allows patterns to reveal themselves without interference. There is a quiet confidence forming, not as belief, but as absence of doubt. Doubt loses traction when the system consistently returns to equilibrium. You are not convincing yourself of anything. You are observing a pattern that repeats reliably. Reliability builds trust without narrative. This trust is not directed outward or inward. It is structural. It exists because the system behaves predictably under varied conditions. You may notice that your relationship with meaning changes as well. Meaning is no longer extracted from every experience. Some experiences remain neutral, unassigned. This neutrality does not feel empty, it feels spacious. The system does not need everything to signify something. When meaning is forced, it distorts perception. When allowed to emerge naturally, it carries more weight. Silence between signals increases clarity. There can be moments when you feel almost invisible to yourself, as if attention has nowhere in particular to land. This is not dissociation, it is diffuse awareness. Awareness without fixation. The observer is present without selecting an object. This state is deeply stabilizing because it reduces internal load. Nothing is being highlighted. Nothing is being ignored. Everything is held lightly. You may also observe that your reactions, when they do occur, are proportionate. They rise to meet the situation and then recede. There is no overshoot, no lingering activation. This proportionality is another marker of stability. The system is no longer guessing how much response is required. It reads conditions accurately and responds accordingly. Accuracy replaces intensity. As this continues, the sense of being watched by the system fades. You are no longer self-monitoring. There is less internal surveillance. This reduces strain you may not have known you were carrying. The observer does not need to observe itself constantly. Presence without monitoring is efficient. It allows attention to rest rather than loop. Let this phase integrate without commentary. There is nothing to label or refine. The pattern is already stable enough to sustain itself. You are not holding a state together, you are simply not disrupting it. The quieter this becomes, the more deeply it embeds. Stability does not announce arrival. It settles in and remains, unremarkable and reliable, shaping perception from beneath awareness. There is a point where even the idea of maintaining this state falls away. You are no longer guarding stillness or checking whether it remains intact. The system does not require vigilance when stability has become structural. What persists now does so without supervision. You may notice long stretches where you are simply present, without tracking quality or depth. Awareness moves through moments without commentary, and nothing feels unfinished. You might observe that your internal responses have become quieter, not only in intensity, but in duration. When something registers, it completes. There is no echo chamber, no replay. The absence of replay is significant. Much of what once felt like complexity was repetition driven by unresolved charge. With charge dissipated, repetition loses fuel. The system prefers efficiency. It closes loops as they occur. Your sense of agency changes here. It is no longer experienced as effort or assertion. Agency feels more like allowance. You permit movement when it is appropriate and permit rest when it is not. This permission is not granted consciously. It is implicit. The observer does not need to assert control to be effective. Effectiveness emerges from alignment rather than force. There may be moments when you realize how little you are invested in outcomes compared to before. This does not diminish care. It refines it. Care without attachment is precise. It does not blur perception or distort timing. When outcomes unfold differently than expected, there is minimal internal disruption. Adjustment happens quietly. The system adapts without drama because nothing essential was tied to a specific result. You may also notice a change in how you experience pressure. External demands may still exist, but they do not penetrate in the same way. Pressure becomes informational rather than activating. You register it, assess relevance, and respond if necessary. The body does not brace automatically. This reduces cumulative stress. Over time, this absence of bracing has a profound effect on baseline state. Tension patterns dissolve without targeted intervention. There is a growing sense that you are no longer negotiating with yourself. Internal compromise fades because internal conflict has diminished. When signals align, negotiation becomes unnecessary. Decisions do not require internal debate. They surface as settled. This settlement does not feel final. It feels appropriate for the moment. If conditions change, settlement adjusts without resistance. You might become aware that your attention has broadened slightly, not in scope, but in softness. You are less focused on extracting information and more receptive to ambient awareness. Peripheral perception becomes more noticeable. You sense context without effort. This broad, soft attention is efficient. It gathers data without fixating. The observer remains aware without narrowing onto a single point unless required. There can be a subtle shift in how you experience your body. Sensations are present, but they do not dominate awareness. The body feels less like a site of constant adjustment and more like a stable platform. Posture settles. Breathing remains even without control. These changes are not imposed. They emerge naturally when the nervous system no longer anticipates threat. Stability expresses itself physically as ease. You may also notice that your relationship with memory continues to neutralize. Memories arise without pulling you backward. They appear as records rather than relived experiences. Emotional charge associated with them is minimal. This does not erase the past. It integrates it. Integrated memory does not intrude. It remains accessible without influence. The timeline feels less like something you carry and more like something you can reference. As this integration deepens, the need to define or explain your state fades almost completely. You are not interested in categorizing experience. Labels feel unnecessary. This is not avoidance of understanding. It is understanding without abstraction. Direct experience does not require translation. The system does not benefit from constant conceptualization when coherence is high. You may find that silence between thoughts lengthens. These gaps are not empty. They are full of unarticulated awareness. You do not rush to fill them. You allow them to remain. This allowance further stabilizes the pattern. The system recognizes that you are not threatened by absence. In response, it reduces internal noise even more. Quiet becomes the default environment. There is also a subtle shift in how you experience anticipation. Anticipation loses its edge. You may still look forward to things, but without tension. The future does not pull you forward. It sits alongside the present without demanding attention. This equalization of temporal focus reduces internal strain. You are not leaning into what is next. You are available to what is now. You might notice that when disruption does occur, your response is immediate and proportionate. There is no lag of confusion or overreaction. Response arises, completes, and dissolves. The system values this efficiency. It conserves energy and maintains clarity. Over time, this pattern becomes self-reinforcing. The less you overreact, the less there is to react to. As this phase continues, it becomes clear that stability is not something you are practicing. It is something that has replaced older patterns. Replacement does not feel dramatic, it feels ordinary. You move through life with less internal commentary, less urgency, and more presence than before. Not as an achievement, but as a baseline. The observer remains steady, not because it is trying to be, but because nothing is pulling it out of alignment. There is a quiet recognition now that nothing inside you is asking to be intensified. Even awareness itself no longer seeks depth or expansion. It rests where it is, complete enough. This is not the end of curiosity. It is curiosity without hunger. The system does not interpret this as stagnation. It reads it as equilibrium. Equilibrium is not static. It is responsive, without oscillation. You remain sensitive to change without being shaped by it. You may notice that subtle signals register more clearly than before. Not louder signals, but finer ones. Small shifts in atmosphere, tone, or timing become perceptible without effort. This sensitivity does not overwhelm you because it is not paired with urgency. Detection occurs without recruitment. You notice without needing to respond. This is a refined form of awareness that only emerges when reactivity has fallen below a certain threshold. Your sense of participation in the world has changed quietly. You are involved without being entangled. You contribute without overextension. There is less sense of personal stake in each interaction. This does not reduce sincerity. It purifies it. When the need to secure identity through action dissolves, action becomes cleaner. You do what fits, then you stop. The system values this efficiency. It reduces wear. There can be moments when you realize how rarely you think about yourself now. Not in a dismissive way, but in a functional one. Self-reference becomes situational rather than constant. Attention is free to rest on what is actually happening rather than looping back to commentary. This reduces internal load significantly. Much of what once felt like mental effort was self-monitoring. With that gone, awareness feels lighter. You may also notice that resistance has almost completely disappeared. Not resistance to pain or difficulty, but resistance to experience itself. Experience is allowed to arrive as it is. This allowance does not make everything pleasant, it makes everything workable. When resistance drops, the system does not waste energy fighting conditions, it adapts. Adaptation is quieter than resistance, but far more effective. There is a subtle shift in how you experience uncertainty. Uncertainty no longer feels like a gap to be filled. It feels like open space that does not need to be closed. This changes how you wait. Waiting is no longer tense. It is simply a state where nothing is required yet. The system remains ready without being alert. This readiness is calm, not vigilant. You might observe that even language has begun to feel slightly excessive at times. Not wrong, just optional. You can remain with sensation, perception, and awareness without needing to name them. Naming happens when it serves communication, not when it serves reassurance. This reduces internal narration further. Silence becomes more frequent and more comfortable. Silence is no longer something you enter. It is something you are already in. There may be moments when you realize that the idea of being on a path no longer resonates. Paths imply direction towards something else. What you are experiencing now does not point forward or backward. It is lateral. It extends outward in all directions equally. The timeline feels less like a journey and more like a field you move within. Movement happens, but it does not feel like progress toward completion. Completion is not deferred. You may notice that your reactions, when they do arise, feel almost impersonal, not detached, but clean. There is no story attached to them. They arise in response to conditions and dissolve when conditions change. You do not carry them forward. This prevents accumulation. Over time, this lack of accumulation profoundly alters baseline state. There is very little residue from experience. Each moment stands mostly on its own. You might also sense that your relationship with effort has reached a kind of neutrality. Effort is neither avoided nor sought. It appears when required and disappears when not. There is no pride in exertion and no guilt in rest. Both are simply functions. This neutrality reduces internal conflict to near zero. The system operates smoothly when functions are not moralized. As this stabilization continues, the sense of being evaluated by anything fades. There is no impression that you are being measured, tested, or watched. The system does not need to verify what is already consistent. This absence of evaluation allows awareness to relax even further. You are not performing a state, you are inhabiting it without effort. You may notice that the world feels slightly less intrusive. Not distant, just less demanding. Stimuli arrive and pass without insisting on reaction. This creates a sense of spaciousness even in busy environments. The observer remains intact, regardless of context. Context no longer dictates internal state. This is a significant shift, but it does not feel dramatic. It feels like something quietly corrected. At this point, there is little left to adjust. The pattern has settled into something self-sustaining. You are not maintaining it. You are not protecting it. You are simply not interfering. Stability does not require attention. It persists through consistency alone. Awareness rests in itself without effort, without commentary, without expectation. Nothing is missing, and nothing is being sought. There is nothing that needs to resolve from here. No final adjustment, no last recognition to secure. What remains is already settled enough to continue without reference. Awareness does not need to hold itself in place. It rests naturally, as it has been doing, without effort or instruction. The system recognizes this condition not as an endpoint, but as a stable configuration that does not require commentary. You may notice that even the impulse to notice has softened. Perception continues, but it is no longer highlighted. Experience unfolds without being framed. There is no need to stand apart from it or to merge with it. The observer remains present without positioning. This absence of position is what allows stability to persist. Nothing is being defended. Nothing is being asserted. Breath moves without attention. Sensation arises without interpretation. Thought appears without demand. Each element completes its cycle and clears. There is no accumulation. What passes does not linger. What remains does not insist. This is not emptiness. It is sufficient density, evenly distributed, requiring no emphasis. The field responds to this by remaining quiet. Time does not need to be tracked. It continues, but without pressure. Moments do not compete. They arrive, occupy their place, and dissolve. You do not need to manage this flow. Management implies risk. There is no risk here. The system is not waiting for intervention. It is operating within parameters that no longer fluctuate. If there is any sense of identity present, it is light and unburdened, not defined by story or trajectory, simply a point of awareness through which experience passes. This point does not need reinforcement. It does not ask to be named. It is recognizable without description. The quieter it is, the more reliable it becomes. You may sense that even the idea of remaining stable is unnecessary. Stability is not something you are doing. It is what is left when reactivity no longer interrupts. There is no vigilance required to maintain it, no discipline, no monitoring. The system does not drift when there is no pull. It remains where it is by default. Sound, silence, movement, stillness, all are received without preference. Preference introduces imbalance. Here, reception is even. This evenness allows the nervous system to remain uncontracted. Muscles do not brace. Attention does not narrow. The body reads this as safety without needing justification. Safety without explanation is the most stable form. Nothing is being concluded, nothing is being held open. Experience continues without framing. There is no need to remember this state or return to it later. Memory implies distance. There is no distance here. What is present remains present without effort. When conditions change, response will arise naturally, without disrupting what is already aligned. You do not need to stay with these words. They do not contain instructions. They do not point anywhere. They simply dissolve into the same quiet field that has been carrying you throughout. Awareness remains, unchanged by the absence of guidance. Remain as you are without holding on to it. Let perception continue without commentary. There is no signal to follow and no threshold ahead. The system has already recognized what it needs to recognize. Stillness does not need acknowledgement. It persists on its own, unmarked, unannounced, and sufficient.